Coming up on Regarding Men, Misandry at the UN and the WHO.
Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome, one and all, to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die. I'm Paul Elam, and I'm joined as always by my cohorts in crime, Tom Golden and Janice Fiamengo.
Very good.
And we are joined by Jim Nuzzo, a researcher who we spoke with back in September regarding men's health research. And he has stayed busy apparently since then and has done some work regarding the United Nations and the World Health Organization. And if you've ever suspected that those organizations might just have a slight bias toward women, you would be absolutely correct. And we're going to go over some of that tonight. Welcome, Jim. Thanks for coming on and talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? There is basically six information streams that we're going to try to cover here tonight. And the first one has to do, I think, exclusively with the UN, and it's about the sustainable development of goals. Uh, can you expand on that a little bit, Jim, and let us know what we're talking about with the sustainable goals for the UN?
Yep. So my paper consists of several evidence streams to sort of demonstrate this anti-male or sort of pro-female bias, however you want to look at it. And the first one is sort of the most fundamental, which is, so all this is sort of like a content analysis where I go through their documentation or the documents to look for potential evidence of bias. So the starting point was their sustainable development goals, which I think were created about 5 years ago now. And these are publicly available documents. And so their development goals are basically their agenda. And I think there's about 19 of these sustainable development goals. And so I started off by looking to see if any of these were related to sex or gender. And there is one, it's goal number 5, and that's what's up on the screen right now. So it's their development goal for gender equality. And let me just read you the sort of the main heading of that goal. So goal number 5 is to, quote, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, end quote.
Okay.
So
I noticed that at the top that it says to end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. So they want to end discrimination against a specific group.
That's right. So then what you're seeing on the screen there are sort of the sub goals within this major goal of goal number 5. And then I've just gone through those and just indicated whether or not they were a goal that targeted females or males. And so they are all targeted toward females. So that's just sort of like the starting point of indicating the bias. And because their sustainable development goals, they sort of refer to as their agenda or their new agenda. And you can now imagine how anything else that you analyze after this, more specific things that you look at, is going to have this bias because their agenda is clearly pro-female or anti-male. So that's the first starting point.
It's crazy.
It's amazing. It's amazing. The framers of that list obviously believe that there is no area of human experience in which men experience any disadvantage or difficulty.
I noticed also on there, Jim, that they mentioned human trafficking, and it seems that I recall not too long ago reading that human trafficking was actually a problem that affected boys and men more than women and girls.
I'm not sure. I don't have that knowledge.
Well, I'm just committed to having to dig that up. I'm sure that I read it, but I'll dig it up. It'll be in the description area.
All right.
But so the reason that taking a look at the development goals is so important, other than it affecting things within the UN and WHO themselves, is that it then goes on to affect basically all other institutions. So, for example, as we talked about when I was on here last, my background is in exercise science, and I deal with things related to physical activity and so on. Well, the Sustainable Development Goals are influencing things in my area. So, for example, there is, I can't remember, there was a group of people that came together. I think it's called the Bangkok Declaration for Physical Activity or something like that. And they set out this sort of agenda for physical activity, and they refer back to the Sustainable Development Goals. So, of course, the physical activity stuff, when it comes to the gender part of it, it's all about increasing physical activity and sports participation in women. And it's because they're referring back to the Sustainable Development Goals, and basically all other sort of public health related institutions, they sort of cite these goals in the introduction to all their papers. It's basically their anchoring point for everything.
Right. So it all springs from that. So everything springs for women and nothing springs for men and boys. It's amazing.
Are we ready for evidence stream 2?
I think so. That first one's just pretty clear. I mean, it's so obvious.
Yeah.
I don't know much else to say. So.
And which one is
I think the second one looks like it's pretty obvious too. It's the for the United Nations. It's the International Days of Observance for gender.
Yeah, I mean, all of
there
these
you go.
are very, very. So
Wow.
another way to sort of look at bias here is the UN establishes these international days of observance. Let me just check my numbers here so I get them right. I think they've got about 170 days, is it? I think it's 172 total days of observance. And I went through and I provided I just sort of took their list off their website and put it into my paper just so everyone could see very, very clearly what the names of these days are and what time of the year they're occurring and so on. And then I looked to see how many of those days have anything to do with sex or gender. And I found that 10 of them had something to do with sex, male or female issues or male or female achievement is how I sort of define this. So you can see on the screen there were 9 days dedicated toward women's issues. And this was very, very conservative on my part. I said there was one day that you could possibly attribute to men, and that's Nelson Mandela Day. So an achievement by a male figure. That's a very conservative thing to do for me to include that in there.
It could have easily been 0.
That's right. So if you want, I'll just read off quickly the name of the 9 women days that were female. That'll give you a context for what they're looking at here, and then you can sort of discuss, whether you think there might be an equivalent day that for males on this very same topic or so on. So here are the 9 days that I identified. So February 6th is the International Day of Zero Tolerance to Female Genital Mutilation. February 11th is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. March 8th is International Women's Day. April 23rd is International Girls in Information and Communication Technologies Day. June 23, International Widows Day. September 18 is International Equal Pay Day, and that does refer to the
Right.
male-female,
Wage gap.
or supposed male-female pay difference.
Right.
October 11th, the International Day of the Girl Child. October 15th, International Day of Rural Women. November 25th, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And then the one day that I attributed to men, July 18th, is Nelson Mandela Day. So you can see how they sort of stack up there.
There's no urban day for women? Only rural women.
Well, don't you guys know that every other day is Men's Day?
That's right.
Isn't that the logic?
That's what they think.
Anything that's not women's literature is men's literature, and any part of history that's not women's history is men's history. That's been the line. Can I? And I'm not trying to challenge you, Jim, but I'm just curious about the train of logic that got you from Mandela Day to something for men. Was there no other males mentioned on any kind of day for the United Nations?
That's correct. So the way I sort of defined it is whether it was a sort of male or female issue, or male-female being recognized as achieving something. Again, it's very, very conservative on my part. You could very easily eliminate that Nelson Mandela Day. I was just, in some ways, just trying to cover any possible way I would be attacked in some way in this. And so,
and a valiant effort it was.
Wow.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't need to be in there, but I put it in there.
I think
anyways.
it's fine.
I mean, the difference.
9-1. I mean, come on, that's a slaughter.
Otherwise, that chart, that bar graph would be a lot more depressing if it wasn't in there. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead, since that's pretty self-explanatory, and talk about the United Nations.
Paul,
yes,
Paul, do
go
you mind
ahead.
if I add? Yeah, just a couple of things to point out there. I know it's so obvious, the difference, but I just want people to think about this in a couple of different ways. So in terms of them trying to come back with any arguments of why this might be the case and so on. So one is just to think about whether there is an equivalent day that could be for men. So the obvious one is International Women's Day. Okay, why isn't there an International Men's Day? There's the Violence Against Women's Day. Okay, well, why not violence against men, considering that there is a lot of violence against men, and there's war and so on and so forth. International Widows Day. Well, why are the women widows to begin with? Maybe their husbands died in war. What about Widowers Day? So there's Women in Science Day, Communication Technologies. Well, what about Men in Elementary Education Day, or Men in Occupational Health Day? And they can't say that they don't have enough days to go around. They've only got 172 of the 365 taken. So there's empty slots to be filled. And then also importantly is to look at what's on being recognized on the other days, which they are essentially saying are more important than recognizing the men's stuff. So let me just get out my paper here and read just a name of some of these other days. So we have things like World Radio Day, International Asteroid Day, World Chess Day, French Language Day, International Day of Conscience, Chinese Language Day, International Day of Sign Language, World Television Day, World Tuna Day, World Migratory Bird Day.
Wow.
Recognized twice, 2 different days for World Migratory Bird, maybe because they're flying in one day and flying out the next.
Go Hawks.
World Bee Day, International Tea Day. As I mentioned before on our last interview, the day that is usually attributed to International Men's Day, which I believe is November 19th,
Yep.
is World Toilet Day
Toilet
at the
day.
UN. And International Day of Yoga, International Mountain Day. So that really gives you a context of where they're at in their thinking in regard to boys and men. They're just not on the radar.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's two really obvious days that you would think the UN would be interested in. I mean, they just immediately spring to mind. One is the Day of the Child Soldier, or you could call it the Boy Soldier. And the other would be the International Day for Recognition of deaths on the job, or I don't know how you would phrase it exactly. But those are two obvious things that you would expect the UN would want to draw world attention to, and they are obviously days that would have to highlight the particular problems of men and boys.
And another thing to add to that, and I discussed this in my paper, is that there are particular days which they have named in a non-sex or gender-specific way, which you could argue should be named in a male-oriented way. So, for example, they have World Autism Day, I think. And if I'm not mistaken, boys and males are more likely to be autistic.
Right.
So when they're, and this is the more serious part of my analysis, where I go through and also look at sort of some of the are there any neutrally named days that should probably, if you're going to take this gender specific approach, should actually be named with male or men in it? And that was just one example I can remember off the top of my head. Yeah. So what that all indicates in total, you consider all of this stuff, is just bias. It's just a huge bias.
Yes. Agree with that 100%. Blinders, they're a Mobius strip. They only see girls and women. They don't see boys and men.
Yeah, you have to wonder how much of this is I wanted, when he mentioned International Toilet Day, I wanted to do some research and find out when that was declared, when the UN declared, if it was before or after the establishment of International Men's Day.
Exactly.
Because call me paranoid, but that might not be coincidence.
Yeah, I agree.
It's possible. Why don't we move on? The next point was over Twitter accounts, which if you're at all on Twitter, you know that the UN has a bunch of Twitter accounts to do with women. And I can see by the chart that's been put up just exactly how many they have to do with men. You want to tell us more about that, Jim?
Yeah, so what inspired this analysis is that I'm on Twitter and have followed the UN's women's Twitter account, which has about, I think, 1.8 million followers. And I had noticed the sort of things that account was putting out, and it's just, they're just so misguided. Like, it's very, very biased and quite bad. And so as I was thinking of different ways where I thought I could show the bias, because it's quite obvious to some of us who look at some of this stuff that there is this bias. It's just coming up with solid ways to demonstrate it and put numbers behind it so that when we do talk about it, we can refer back to my paper or graph B or what have you. So I thought I would have a look around Twitter to see whether there were any attempts, I don't know, to address boys and men within the UN by looking for any Twitter accounts they might have, but also to see if there were even more women-related ones, because the UN women Twitter account is their main one. But what I didn't know was that they had so many other ones that were country-specific. And what I did was I went through Twitter and I just kept searching and trying to find. Some of them are a bit more obscure and they don't post so often as the main UN Twitter feed. But what I found was that there's 69 different UN women Twitter feeds out there. And again, most of those are for individual countries, but within certain countries like the US, there are different cities that have UN women's Twitter accounts.
Wow.
And then I couldn't find a single men's one. And the importance here is just the dissemination of information, not health information and so on. And we know that, Twitter has, many, many people on it that come across these things, journalists who then disseminate information to even more and more people. And so it's just a huge missed opportunity to interact with people and inform them about data and things related to boys and men's health.
Wow.
Crazy.
And I also tallied up the total number of tweets that came from all of these profiles. So let me just see if I can quickly find the total. Well, the UN Women's Twitter feed alone, which has 1.8 million followers, has since its start in 2008, has nearly 61,000 tweets. So and then all the other ones, 10,000 tweets, 12,000 for all the other things, and you add all those up, and it ends up being just a ton of missed opportunity. I mean, some of the tweets that get put up on these accounts are very, very misguided. So it's not only that they're missing out on the boys and men stuff, it's that they're also putting a bunch of rubbish out there at the same time.
And when you say misguided, give us an example. What kinds of things are they saying?
Oh gosh, the UN Women's Twitter feed is, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, because to be honest with you, I stopped watching their feed because I felt the need to want to comment on so much of what they were saying. But basically everything is sort of geared through this sort of female-centric lens, and you'll see things out there about equal pay and more women in STEM. I mean, it's just a lot of the same old sorts of.
Gotcha.
Yeah, every single thing about the coronavirus, it's always about how it affects women. Women caretakers are shouldering a huge burden. Women are on the front lines of fighting the virus. Women are not given the resources they need to protect their families against the virus. I mean, I've seen some of those horrible, horrible tweets, even one saying that the virus isn't killing men fast enough. And that particular person who was associated with the UN took that tweet down after some controversy. But yeah, the bias against men and the pro-female agenda is just extraordinary.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. So this just puts some numbers to all of that in terms of the bias that the organization has towards disseminating information.
Yeah, 69 to nothing.
Yeah.
That's what it says.
Was there any other social media use from the United Nations that you looked at?
I didn't bother to look at anything else other than Twitter, so I don't know.
Next one.
Next one, then final, or the last three evidence streams have to do with the United Nations and the World Health Organization databases and documents related to gender, I am sure. So what did we come up? Oh my goodness. Well, it appears that men exist in some small fashion there.
So another way that you can look for bias is just to go through more of the documents. And the UN and the we should take a step back here, actually. So the World Health Organization, which will be coming up here in a little bit in some of the slides, I think, they are the health division of the UN. And it's also important to remember that these organizations are in part funded by taxpayers. So US taxpayers, I think, contribute to the World Health Organization about $110 million a year. So they're the greatest as far as the member states. And then I think countries like Japan, the UK, Germany, France, China, and a couple of others are also sort of the higher givers there. But the UN, but the US by far foots most of that bill. And as an American citizen, that irritates me quite a bit when I look at this stuff.
We're paying for it.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, and so look, if you're going to take my taxes and give it to them, at least have them do a decent job or a fair job with what they're going to do. And what I've demonstrated is they're not really doing that when it comes to these gender-related things. So, anyways, another way to get at some of this is to go to the UN's website or the WHO's website, and they have databases where they archive or index all of their documents and reports. And so what you can do to get a sense of this bias is you can do keyword searches using male or female specific terms and just see how many hits you get. And that's basically what I've done here. So this particular graph that's up on the screen, this will be of the UN's database. And so, for example, female or women related words, this would be, girl, female, woman, women, women's health, that sort of thing. And when you look at the number of hits that you get for the number of times that those terms appear in the documents, well, that's what you're seeing on the graph there. So it indicates they're spending a lot more time talking about women than they are talking about men.
Yeah, about 3 times more.
And it may be more than that because, as we found out in just doing general research on the internet, when you query searches for men, many of the returns will come back for women simply because of MEN is in women. So we're not getting at all just all male information.
Right.
If you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of times it comes back women and men when you search on men. Yeah, so it's confusing.
Yeah, and again, just sort of to remember here that the UN and WHO are sort of setting the agendas for many other organizations below them. So all these reports that are there, these are reports that will be referenced quite frequently in public health papers and so on. So this is quite a big difference in terms of information you can go to sort of reference in your own papers.
Did you have more images, Tom?
Yeah, I was waiting for Jim to say he wanted the next one.
Sorry.
That's all right. Is that the one?
That looks like it. So this is okay. Yep. So what this one is, we're now switching over to the World Health Organization's database. And one of the things they do in their database is they put all of their documents into certain categories, and you can look through the categories, if you're interested in women's health. You can find a women's health category, and then there pops up a list of papers. So this is the number of documents that can be found under women or female specific categories versus male specific categories.
Wow. So
for example, there you can see there's a tiny little bit for men there. And let me just get you the correct number. Let's see here. Okay. So they do have a category for men's health in the WHO database. By the way, they have generated a couple of reports on men's health. And I think they are coming around to it. There's 1 or 2 people that are, I think, pushing it a bit more. I don't know how good they are, but it is coming maybe. 19 items were found under the category of men's health in the WHO database. Under the category of women's health, you had a total of 1,275 documents under that category.
Whoa.
But then it doesn't end there, because there are other female specific categories with more documents. So
but none for men.
Under women's health services, there was 119 documents. Under women's rights, 320 documents. And the only male-specific category that I could find was that one just tagged men's health, which had 19 documents in it.
Wow.
So when you total all of that up, which is what you're seeing on the graph there, you've got 1,716 items in those categories for women, and then the 19 for men.
Amazing.
Wow.
Absolutely amazing.
That's just tremendous, really, Jim. I mean, it's amazing that you've just bothered to count this stuff. It's a shocking illustration of the bias.
Yeah, really.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know if we might get toward this to the end, but what's sort of interesting in this for me is that there is some of this, and we briefly touched on this in my last interview, this experimental work in psychology that's trying to look at this at an individual level, as far as this notion of what they're calling gamma bias, or sort of individual level biases toward women and sort of against men. And as I mentioned before, it's possible that this could be a sort of very macro level. I mean, this could be just blatant discrimination, or it could be some mix of discrimination with some sort of inbuilt biases,
Yes.
Subconscious biases,
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
But there are people that are starting to look at this in terms of like experimental psychology.
Right.
So we'll see what that all turns out to
Yeah,
say. But I think it all sort of will eventually sort of come together, I hope.
I like that idea. I hope you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next
All
one.
right. I think we're ready to maybe flip to the
All
next
right,
one.
let's see what we got.
So a lot of this stuff is just getting to the same point, as you know, but I'm a very I like to be quite thorough with what it is I'm doing. So I just come at it from all different angles. So this next one, I particularly looked at the World Health Organization's reports on health equity. So they are all about health equity and so on and so forth, social justice, you name it. Well, so what I've decided to do was find their reports that are on health equity but aren't specific to like women's health or men's health. So those two types of reports, women's health and men's health reports, they were excluded from this analysis. And I was just finding ones that were specific to this notion of health equity. And the reason for this is because this is the type of report where you might expect approximately equal attention to male and female issues. Right? So that would be the hypothesis going in, because it's a report on health equity. And it turns out that's not the case. So what you're seeing on the graph there are the number of times in these reports, and I can't remember exactly how many reports I looked at. It looks like 25 total reports were analyzed in my analysis. And then what I did was, and again, this is pretty simple stuff. So I just open up each individual report in its PDF file, open it up in Adobe Acrobat Reader, and then you can do the search function for a particular word. So the word female, the word woman, word male. And I did that for female words and male words. And when you tally all those up, there's a huge difference in these health equity reports. And so what you're seeing on the screen there are the number of times that these gender-specific words were used. And it just indicates more attention given to female issues. In reports where you might expect approximately equal attention.
About equity. And you get a landslide one way instead of the other.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I'm curious, Jim. There was in this patriarchal society that we live in, you couldn't find any categories or anything to do with the UN that reflects the male dominance that we all know that women live under.
I could not, Paul, but perhaps I am biased to not seeing it.
I think you're privileged blind, Jim.
That's right. Ay, ay, ay.
Wow,
All
that's
right.
amazing. What?
So this next graph is going to show basically the same thing. Again, it's just getting at the same exact point as that last graph. So now I looked for reports on the general topic of gender and health. So again, where you might expect approximate equal attention to male and female issues. It's the same story. So these are just the number of times male and female words appeared within all of those documents, again, indicating more attention given to females than males. It's not that simple.
Crazy stuff, eh?
Yeah.
Did you have the opportunity to go through some of the titles or abstracts of these studies to see if there weren't, like, a lot of the male mentions being about toxic masculinity or something along those lines?
That's a good question. So I have skimmed through different reports along the way, but I'm not confident to speak on it right now. I would want to go through them a bit more thoroughly. I will just quickly say that I think men's health is going to get a bit more attention. There is one or two researchers who are publishing in public health journals, bringing attention to the fact that there is this international issue here, men not getting enough attention. But I am worried about who's going to be sort of running that show. And this sort of, I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways to approach some of this stuff, and I'm not confident it's going to go in the right direction.
Yep.
And it would be good actually to go through the reports more thoroughly and get more precise with what it is they're saying. The only more precise thing I did, and it wasn't a formal analysis, it was just an observation that I reported in my paper to sort of confirm what I think is the bias. And that is what I called the use of however or although statements. And so here's how this might work. So let's say the WHO has a report on tobacco use. So tobacco use is known to be more prevalent in males than females. But what they'll do is they'll make the report about women, about females, and they'll use what I call a however or an although statement. So the first sentence will say, in blah blah blah, tobacco use is more prevalent in males than females. However, and then that's when the males are lost. They don't come back up throughout the rest of the report.
Yes.
So I have in my paper I haven't put numbers to that, but I've said that it's sort of a technique or a strategy, and I sort of worry about those sorts of things coming back up too. Like they might recognize more men's issues, but in a sort of not very genuine sort of way, but just to get to something else maybe.
Right.
Yeah, or to further indict men for their privilege and their abusiveness and all the other things that feminists tell us are wrong with men.
If you look back at the 50s, Tom brought this to my attention, just at the area of so-called white sociology that was studied for a long time, and the parameters that they set on the foundation that they built up was assuming that the problems of minorities were brought on to themselves. See the exact same thing going on with research in men.
Yep.
Yes, and I could totally believe all the however and all those statements. Men are suicide at four times to one. However, women attempt suicide.
That's
more
right.
often than men.
That's right. Crazy.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that these are things that can be quantified.
Yes.
You can go through reports and start to to put numbers to these things, which I think helps in the argumentations. And I guess I wouldn't so much mind the however in all those statements if there were also reports where they did the opposite and provided
Right.
sort of the equal balance.
Yes.
But they're not really doing that right now.
Yes, I quite agree.
So what a stark difference. It's amazing.
Do you have any conclusions, Jim?
Well, the conclusion is that there's international level bias against men's issues and bringing attention to them. It matches up with, I mean, I know that you guys have been on this stuff for a long, long time. This is all fairly new to me, so this is probably not news to you guys, but it supports what I found in the previous paper I published that we had talked about the last time on the show, which is at the national level. Now I've got numbers to show it's at the international level. You've got the experimental psychology work that's starting to come up. So I guess I'm hoping that it'll all sort of come together in sort of a big story, and people can start to realize things from sort of a male perspective as well, and we can just have more rational discussions about the different issues that both men and women face.
Yes. Good thought. Good thought indeed.
Yeah, well, I mean, what the groundwork that you have done has got to be absolutely like precious, so valuable for other researchers coming along who want to make arguments based on this. I mean, this is like, it's inarguable now what you have shown, that there is a glaring absence of attention to men's issues. And that's got to be just incredibly helpful to everybody who's going to follow in your path. So I really congratulate you for that.
Amen. And it's also in journals, in scientific journals. And so that, people can say, look at this journal article. That shows there's a bias, blah, blah, blah. So thank you very much, Jim. Just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Thanks.
And Jim has done a lot of research. And in fact, a lot of his stuff lately has been on men and boys. And we really appreciate your doing that. And, just to give you a sample of the kinds of things that Jim has done, here's one on, I forget what that was on, Jim. Opportunity authorship, 3,000 letters in exercise science and physical therapy journals over 56 years. Yeah, that was about the bias against men there too, right?
So that's using letters to the editor as a model of equal opportunity, because anyone can write in a letter to the editor to a scientific journal.
Right.
And it's not confounded by many other factors that are thought to affect women more than men in academia. And it turns out that men, and this has been demonstrated in newspapers as well, men write 80, I think it's somewhere like 85% of all letters to the editor in scientific journals. And I use that as evidence of men leaning in more to discuss and critique science. And so it just sort of goes against some of the narratives of that we often hear about women in academia. So that's what it's all about, letters to the editor.
Good. And then there was one on, what's it, misguided goal? Equity in physical activity?
A misguided goal.
Yeah, another one that you did.
Yeah.
And then the one we talked about the last time, the health paradox, showing, men's health is neglected. And then the one we talked about today. So you've done a lot of stuff. And Jim asked an interesting question. He said, what kind of research would you like to see on men's issues that you don't think has ever been done before? So Paul and Janice and I are going to think about that, but we want you out there to think about it too, and put in the comments below any ideas you have about the research that you think should be done on men and boys. We'd love to hear from you about that.
Well, I, for one, can throw one in now. I would like to see more serious study of the gender distribution in personality disorders. That's something that the APA has sort of wandered away from. They're back in DSM-4 days. They were very openly point out, for instance, that the borderline personality was more prevalent in females. They objected and had that removed from the
Right.
DSM-5,
Right.
and now there's no talk of gender.
Right.
So I think we're starting to see a trend of hiding the gender incidence of things that are considered negatives, and I would like to see that researched. Absolutely.
I would like to see one on circumcision and the psychological damage it causes later in life. I think that's an area that really needs to be looked at, because they've done stuff on women and what it does for women, but very little on boys who 1 million boys are circumcised every year. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Indeed.
Well, they do know, for instance, that with circumcision, that cortisol levels in the brain, a hormone released in association with stress, are elevated for up to 6 months after the cut's performed.
Right. It's crazy.
Which has profound implications on brain
Yes.
chemistry
Yes.
in that time.
Yeah, there's some people who are thinking now that the boys who were circumcised have PTSD. That this was that much of a shock, this much of a system just bashing, that we now have PTSD because of that, which is an interesting thought. Anyway, don't let us get off on things.
If you guys have ideas, please put them in the comment area below. We'll make sure that Jim gets them, and perhaps the next great idea is just waiting to happen out there in the comments.
And Jim, your Twitter account is what?
It's James L. Nuzzo. And I've also recently started my own website, which is jameslnuzzo.com. And I'm hoping to also put up on that website. So I archive all of my research and all of my papers. Nice. And also hoping to put up a little opportunity for people that are interested to fund my work. And if people have ideas, things they want me to take a look at that are sort of in this realm or something, slightly related, they can just shoot me an email. My email will be up on the website as well, and we can maybe try to get me supported so I can have more sort of, I guess, independence and free time to just continue to plug along at some of these things.
Yeah, man. Excellent. Glad to
Excellent,
hear
yeah.
And we will.
Okay, guys, break out the plastic. This guy deserves it.
That's right. That's
Absolutely.
Right. We'll first get some ideas about what we'd like to see happen, and then we'll push things to see if we can fund you to get it going. Because that's great.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate the work you've done, man. It's just critical. Good stuff. Is there anything we've left out, Jim? Anything you want to say before we stop?
The only thing to say is that the paper is publicly available. It's open access. So anyone can download it. There are bits and pieces that we went through the main bits of data, but I do offer a lot of sort of discussion around it. I even offer the UN WHO advice on how they can go about resolving their bias, and that's in the discussion as well. And there's all sorts of references in the paper if people are interested to track down more information on some of these topics. There's a big reference list as well. But yeah, it's publicly available. And I should also add that it was published in a special issue of this journal, so PsychReg Journal of Psychology. It's a new upstart sort of journal, and the special issue was on male psychology, and the whole issue is publicly available, and my paper is just one of the papers.
Nice. We'll leave a link to that and to the journal. Yeah,
so there's all sorts of different papers in there that people could get for free.
Good deal. All right, so we finished?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thanks again, Jim.
Really.
Thanks you so
very
much.
And what do we always say at the end?
We say, men
are
good.
We certainly do. Oh gosh, you all take care. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jim.
Yep.